My name's Chris. I'm the founder of the Helios group, based here in Arizona. I'm a licensed private investigator. Uh, Professionally, I've been working in technical operations for about 25 years. It's probably about 24 and almost 25 years. Specifically been doing computer forensics and cyber incident response in an expert capacity for the last 16 years. Prior to that, 2004, I was a technical expert under the Status of Forces Agreement between the German and US governments, and I worked for the 66 Military Intelligence Group based in Darmstadt. I was a part of all of the various operations, specifically involving counterintelligence aspects, and was supporting the counterintelligence mission there in Germany during that time frame. That's also when the 66 stood up their cyber forensics team, and as an SME, I was assisting that team with the standing up of their lab, and then also was brought in to assist them on some cases when they came across technologies or things that they didn't quite know what to do with, because they were all sworn agents who came from an investigative side. So they pulled me in from the technical engineering side of things to help them unravel what it is they were dealing with and, accomplish their mission. Before that, I spent a year downrange in Kosovo, working for DLA, supported a lot of the same kind of people that I did when I worked in Darmstadt, Germany. And yeah, I got to learn a lot about, coming from the Army, I knew a lot about what was going on in Korea because I spent a year of my 4 years there. I didn't really learn a whole lot about our nation's enemies globally there. We were very focused on North Korea and the North Korea threat. But then in Kosovo is where I learned a lot about our nation's enemies from an international perspective. And it was during that time prior to 9/11 that we were tracking and operating against this little group known as Al-Qaeda that nobody had heard about at the time. And the name didn't really resonate with me either at the time until after 9/11 happened. And then I was like, oh, that's who those guys were. Got it. So, what's important about the CI aspect of things, and as we kind of get into some of these things, and it's one of the issues I kind of will talk about with how dealing with law enforcement sometimes can be a little frustrating for me personally, and I know several other people who have similar frustrations, is that they very much approach it from a different mindset than we do coming from the intel world. Part of the problem I think exists is because coming from the intel world, we are a little bit more advanced with collecting information, data, data points, different sources, multi-source intelligence, and aggregating it all in, chopping it up, dicing it all up, and making sense of it, right? Law enforcement tends to be crippled. They don't get the budgets that we used to, which means they also don't get the exposure to what's potentially possible out there in the world. So from an information gathering and data exploitation perspective, I think law enforcement is at a major disadvantage, especially when we're dealing with local PDs and stuff like that, which is what we dealt with in this case, but we did also deal with a federal agency, and we're going to talk about that. So under the Arizona revised statutes, as a private investigator, I've highlighted the major points here in this slide as to where my authority or where my allowances are under the state statutes to have conducted the investigations that I did and everything that I'm about to speak about here. So this isn't just me as some IT guy running around, going crazy. This is me as the qualifying party for the company that I founded for this agency, operating under the statutes for the state. these statutes are very broad, what the definition of a private investigator is, but we often have to turn around and actually refer to this when we start getting pushback from parties who should be viewing us as a partner to them, but actually just view us as an adversary or as just some guy off the street. And so when you're dealing with a local police officer who is completely ignoring the state statute for what a PI is authorized to do in the state, and the type of activities that we're authorized to provide in a private capacity, you know, it's not them acting in good faith under the law and under the intent of the citizens of the state of Arizona. So I put this up here just to give a warning. This was like the worst TV mature audiences only language, sex, and violence. So I will advise that some of the conversation that or things I'm going to be presenting and talking about might upset some people. There's not going to be any pictures or anything like that, but I'm going to be describing this the scenario, and in other conversations with people, when I've kind of discussed this and run some of these things by them, they actually said, hey, you may want to add this slide to your presentation because you know, they were reliving a past trauma as I was describing some of the stuff to them. So if you're sensitive, if you've been a victim of any kind of sexual assault or anything along those lines, just know that, or you know somebody that has, or these types of things are hard for you to listen to. Just know that we will be talking about these things, and you might want to take this as a time to not listen any further. We're going to discuss statements made by the victim related to her abuse. I didn't just do the forensics in this. I also did conduct an initial interview with the victim. Yeah, she described a scenario where she was drugged by the predator in this case. We're also going to talk about grooming, and this is a big thing. It's I think kind of the biggest problem in this entire case, and where we have a case initialization or a case entry point failure, because we're required as a part of how we interact with law enforcement to go through a patrol officer who's not trained to understand this stuff, has no experience in doing this stuff. You don't get to a detective until a case has already been set up. So if that guy in that uniform on the street doesn't believe that there's something here, and a case isn't or a report isn't filed, and it isn't assigned to a detective who might have more sophistication to know what we're dealing with, it goes completely unaddressed, which leads to the injustice aspect of this. The end result of this matter is heartbreaking, and there's a lot of injustice here. So if these things, these details are something that might upset you or hurt you, just know that we will be going down that path. So the big question I've had people ask me is, what do I hope to accomplish here? I want to just bring awareness to these issues. This is a real scenario. This isn't a what if. This isn't a speculation or anything. This actually happened. I'm not speaking secondhand from it. I am the firsthand, and I have all the evidence in my possession to back this entire presentation up. This is not an attack on law enforcement. This is merely pointing out some of the systemic problems that we have, and not just law enforcement, but the court system and the way that the entire process works, involving decisions made in a courtroom around a minor, particularly around a minor who's 15 years old, about to turn 16, who is viewed as being able to speak for themselves. So this is a very trimmed down kind of view, and this is just just to give you all a little bit of an overview of the players here. So we've got our predator, who's a 55-year-old male. Our victim is a 15-year-old female. The predator also, the way that he made contact with this girl, it was through mom. Dad got introduced to him as well. Mom was essentially coerced into having sex to relieve a debt, and I'm going to get into those details there. We believe there may be some activity of dad pimping mom out. This is due to the fact that the family had come under a financial stress at the time. Dad has had a history of DCS being called on him for physical abuse of the mom in the past by other siblings, not the 15-year-old victim here, but an older sibling of hers. And it's suspected mom may have facilitated the contact with the predator and knew what was going on and allowed it to happen. And we have text messages and everything from mom's phone, as well as her statements to us, to DCS, and to law enforcement, where we believe that it may have been the case where mom was, if not a directly pimping her daughter out, but was at least wittingly allowing it to happen. The victim, and you see there I've got these two dotted lines going to a 14-year-old best friend, BFF, for those of you who don't understand BFF, best friend forever. So her 14-year-old BFF and another 15-year-old BFF. The BFF's mom found out from her daughter that the victim, her daughter, and this other 14-year-old girl went over to this guy's house. He drove from Scottsdale to Phoenix after midnight, picked these girls up and drove them back to his mansion in Scottsdale. The BFF's mom contacted a friend of hers, and that's essentially how I ended up getting involved. BFF's mom is an attorney, and because she was friends with the BFF's mom, we spoke and we basically conflicted her out of any involvement in this. So the attorney who brought me in was not actually involved at all in any of the investigation of the case because of the closeness to the other girl and potentially to the victim. So we conflicted her out for making sure there were no emotional issues that came into play. When I first got involved, I came over to the house, and the mom handed me the victim's phone and started showing me what she believed to be the grooming. The criminal defense attorney did. She knows that I've worked on child exploitation throughout my career. I've worked on both the prosecutorial side and on the defense side. After I looked through some of those conversations and was told the individual on the other end was a 50-year-old or so male that was just an acquaintance of the family. There was this reference to him being the quote uncle, but he really isn't a blood relative. He was just an acquaintance of the family. I agreed there was likely an issue, but needed further investigation. At this point, though, we didn't have specifically enough to call law enforcement, and certainly would need to understand more about what's going on before calling law enforcement. And as you see, despite doing some additional investigation and teeing this entire thing up, law enforcement still wasn't willing to or capable of taking this issue on and addressing the problems. So I did do this case pro bono, and the reason I did it is because, having been in this field as long as I have, I'm very familiar with the statistics from National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. If you guys are not familiar with that site and you want a lot more in-depth information about all the issues that I'm going to talk about here, missingkids.org. Just hit that site and you could spend the next 3 weeks of quarantine just reading about all the issues related to exploitation of children. And this is, this isn't just abductions of kids. This is also online exploitation. This comes down to that, the four walls of your home are no longer a barrier to protect your children, because now you got that phone, that device in front of them, and they're going to be in contact with everyone in the world. So the numbers are bad, and in the time, I think NECMIC was, it was back in the day, during the days of the Adam Walsh Act, when Adam Walsh was, I think, abducted and murdered, and John Walsh, the TV crime guy, I'm trying to think of the name of the show, if somebody remembers the name of it, America's Most Wanted. John Walsh got into that whole line of things after what had happened to his son. So this has been around for a while. We've seen it. I've seen it from the prosecutorial side, but I've done criminal defense work. I still do criminal defense work. I have a view into what goes on from the predator's perspective that I think most cops who spend a career in this field will never see, because there's an attorney between them and and the suspect on it. And a lot of times the suspect just starts telling us stuff as a part of the case. And so we get some very interesting insight into the criminal's mind sometimes by doing the defense work. So agencies involved in this: City of Scottsdale Police Department, Phoenix PD, Homeland Security Investigations, Department of Child Safety, the Guardian Ad Litem Advocates, and the Maricopa County court system. So when I tell people this story, almost instantly, I get this look of rage from people like, why didn't you tell somebody? Why didn't you get somebody involved? Why didn't you do something about it? I put this in front of you here because these are all the organizations that we had to force our way in to get to even try to look at it. We had to call in favors from people we knew at the Attorney General's office to get Homeland Security to look at it. We had to talk to school resource officers who take a lot more interest in these types of cases than the average, cop answering the phone for, 911, what's your emergency? Department of Child Safety, we had to, log our own request on their abuse line. We did everything and then some to try to get the appropriate parties to step in and do their job as we as society expect them to do their job. So starting off with our predator here. So as I said, mom and dad were having some financial problems. So our predator meets mom when she was working as a cam girl. There's actually several studios local here in the Valley where they have these like fake bedroom kind of setup type deals, that they're actual studios, and there are these guys operating these sort of cam girl websites. And what this is, if you're not familiar with it, is there's a woman who gets tipped online, or might make some money through someone subscribing to one of these sites. A lot of times there's credit card fraud involved in these things, so the time that's being paid for on this is being used by stolen credit card numbers, things of that nature. In some cases, the cam girls and the operators of these sites themselves are behind some of the credit card fraud. So this is a very much an exploitative type scenario. And for the woman involved in this, where she ended up, and the husband as well ended up in a financial loss was her father passed away, and she was relying on her father for income. They had some jobs that they did, but they weren't like large income type jobs that would keep them stable, and they weren't stable. Both of them were using drugs, right? So people with heavy drug use tend not to be able to hold down a job. The exceptions out there are just that. They're absolute exceptions of people who are high functioning users. But this is when you involve methamphetamine and cocaine as a daily substance to your life, you can pretty much bet that you're not going to be a stable person at work, or as an adult with custody over minors. So she goes to work as a cam girl. He meets her there. He starts grooming her first, gets to know her. They meet in real life. Gave them a place to live. Started developing the debts, gave him a place to stay, which was the casita on the property where his mansion is. He, quote, gave the vehicle to them, helped them get back on their feet. Then when he wanted something, he became aggressive with her when they couldn't pay off the debt. And so I know you're thinking like, wait, you just said he gave it to them. Well, exactly. So this was a part of his plan the entire time, was, seem like this knight in shining armor type person who was coming to their aid, when in fact, he knew through his interactions with her on the cam girl site that she had young girls, 2 daughters. The older daughter is an adult and is out of the house and wasn't involved in this scenario, but I did actually speak to that daughter, and that daughter did convey some of the physical abuse issues from the dad from before. So now they need the money. This guy's found his victim. They've got a 15-year-old girl. He lets them start staying with them, and at the casita, the young girl, to give mom and dad some space, gets to stay inside the house with him. Now she's on the first floor of the house and has her own bedroom, bathroom, little thing there for herself. So it's like her own private little thing. And what 15-year-old girl wouldn't want to live in a, going through this situation that she is, and mom and dad being transient and everything, they've bounced around from people's homes and everything, and she really doesn't have a whole lot. Being a 15-year-old girl at that point in time in her life, that's got to be hard. So now all of a sudden, she's met this guy who's, letting her stay in this beautiful home. He became aggressive with mom and then started to make threats against her, basically asserting that he'd use his financial position to have her kids taken away from her. Now, mom's not the best person ever, but she's still a mom, and she doesn't want her kids taken away from her. Understandable. So now he has leverage against her. He then starts asking mom if the victim, the minor, had any promiscuous friends, and was asking, and then also asked mom if she could find some young girls that are interested in modeling for him. And this comes up again later, the modeling thing. And then as things all kind of started to unravel with all this, he then basically solicited mom for sex and videotaping it in exchange for relieving the debt that her and her husband owe him. Remember, he had come across as this knight in shining armor that was there, taking pity on this family going through this financial hardship. And mom was willing to do some things and put herself out there. And she tried to play like she was protecting her daughter the whole time. But as we did the forensics, which mom actually did willingly hand her phone over to me to pull the text messages off of her phone between her and this individual, we found out that mom wasn't telling us the truth. And mom, again, why we suspect mom may have been complicit in allowing some exploitation of her daughter to occur. So going back to the missingkids.org, this is this is one of their examples of grooming, and just taking this as just a quick thing, putting this together for this presentation. I've got 5 of the 6 elements here in this case alone, just in the little bit that I did do and see on this case as the initial responding investigator, forensic investigator in this whole thing. Yeah, we're going to get into some of this. I don't want to just sit here and just read off the slide. I hate it when other people do that, so I'm just not going to do it. But this is essentially, for those of you who are not familiar with the term grooming, this is what it, basically kind of boils down to. And if you go to that, again, to missingkids.org, there's a lot of great information on there for you to kind of just go look at and understand what these tactics look like by the predator. So in his grooming of her, he coached her to refer to him as her, quote, uncle, so people don't question their relationship. So it's weird if there's a 15-year-old girl hanging out with a 55-year-old male, right? We would all go, what's going on there? But if it's a relative, we would say, oh, okay, it's a relative. Now, he knew that that would cause an issue. And so he coached her to say, oh, just say I'm your uncle, just so it doesn't get complicated for people. He presented it as a means to try to help her out, so she wouldn't have to be so awkward in a conversation with someone. And she is an awkward kid, right? So he played on that fear to basically kind of cover his base in that regard and kind of keep some of the focus off of him as it pertaining to being any kind of inappropriate relationship. The complimenting of things around every turn. Your parent, something would go down with her parents. Oh, you're so much smarter than them. They don't know how intelligent you are, and that you're going to be a star, and blah blah blah, all that sort of stuff. Everything was just, pick her up, she's the best, and anybody who doesn't agree with that assessment is the worst, right? He sent some illicit images of himself, and the claim was that that there were these other girls at his place, and they were the ones who sent it. It really wasn't him. He was testing the waters to see how she would react. She kind of said, "Oh, that's gross. No, I totally." And he's like, "Oh my God, please delete that." Right? I yelled at them, and when I told them how young you were, they were shocked, and I'm kicking them out now. And she's like, okay, I'll delete it, right? Basically, I don't want to get you in trouble, guy who gives me stuff. He continually would offer to make his house available to the victim and to her friends for parties, right? Hey, you're a 15-year-old girl or not. Like, when I was 15, and if someone was going to offer their mansion up to me to go party at, you don't think I would have taken them up on that? Absolutely, I would have. But in this scenario, he's offering it up to them. He's doing all this other grooming stuff, and he's sticking around as a part of this. He picked him up after midnight one night for what they coined a spa night at his house. When he picked him up that one night, and this is the incident that kind of kicked off the knowledge for the mom, they snuck out of the house. It was over Christmas break for them. And they got in his fancy Porsche, and he drove them to go get some junk food, because the BFF's mom would not let these girls have junk food. She wanted them to eat healthy and everything, so junk food was not something that they would get, except maybe every once in a while. I always knew about the food thing, and I always heard people talk about it, but I'd personally never seen a case where that was used as a manipulation point. And so it was very interesting to see that in a scenario where the parents aren't, or the parental figures weren't allowing kids to have that junk food, and kids just want that junk food, using that as a lure was was very interesting. And he was like, hey, I'll pick you guys up and we can go get some junk food. Like, he offered it out there. So he knew what he was doing. He also gave them cash that night. So they swung by, here he is in his brand new Porsche, fancy Porsche, picks these girls up, takes them for junk food, swings by an ATM machine, pulls out a whole bunch of cash, and then says, here, you guys want some money, and starts handing 20s to all the girls, right? So this is all very, again, this is this grooming behavior. He started offering, he continually offered our victim drugs over a broad length of time, but he also would flaunt how much he had. And when I say felony amounts, we suspect that the drugs were trafficked by his son from another state. So we satisfied the interstate commerce aspects for federal government to take some sort of interest in this, but they didn't. And we're talking, at least in the photo I saw, that was probably close to a pound of marijuana, loose form in a bag, and you know, was just kind of like sitting out on the counter when these girls arrived to the house for, quote, spa night. And he would also buy expensive things over time for the victim. For example, she got the brand new iPhone 11 when it first came out. So to a young girl whose family's going through financial hardships and things like that, this is all really great. And she's thinking like a 15-year-old girl would think. Nothing bad is happening here, right? Well, so later, past that, all of that sort of grooming activity, after we put everything together, and the incident came out that they snuck out and all these things that happened, I conducted an initial interview with the victim. She says he would come out of the room next door to hers with a basket containing a computer, some cables, and what she called lube. And I asked her, well, how do you know that? What do you mean by lube? What is that? She's like, well, it's like sex lube. I went, okay, well, how do you know about that? She's like, well, I mean, he told me what it was. So, okay. During the entire process of the interview, nothing, you know, you have to be careful. For any of you who have never interviewed, especially a minor before, you have to be careful not to set it up to where there's an incentive to the minor to answer the question in a way that they feel they're going to be rewarded for answering it the way that they believe you want them to answer that question, right? So I made sure at the onset of this interview that we established, I don't care what happened. I don't care about whatever. You're not in trouble here. We're here to help you. Please just tell us the truth. That's all I care about is the truth. And we maintained that throughout the entire interview. She told us that he stopped at an adult store one day, and in the timeline of things, when we look at the phones against what actually she described in her interview, all the things she described, with the exception of like this basket, cable, computer, lube situation, all the other things that she described in there, I was able to find and correlate digital artifacts to what her statements were. So I found this young girl when I was interviewing her at the time under a non-stressful situation. She was in a safe place. She was happy to be there. She was talking on her own. No interference, nothing. I found her to be very credible, especially afterwards, having looked at the evidence, taking her interview and backing into the evidence and going, okay, yep, I can see. And she talked about that. Here's the communication where he says he's going to come pick her up, blah, 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 blah. They said they're going for food, they're doing this, they're doing that. All of those little bits and pieces of things where if she was making things up, some of these things, I would expect not to find some of this stuff. But he did offer to pay her $500 to model. Now, that wasn't on her phone, that was on mom's phone. And he was holding that $500 over mom's head because he knew mom was yet again in a bit of a financial thing. And if she would just give her little girl up to to go model for him, that would be fine. So when we started looking at dates and times where she started talking about the adult store visit, that lined up with the $500 modeling offer in the text message piece to mom. He regularly offered her drugs. There was tons of text messages from him about that. And also he would also offer to uh, draw her a bath and leave a bong for her. So he was, making her baths in his master bathroom, which was like the spa bathroom upstairs, and would leave a bong for her up there in that room. And that was not, there was some I guess like slang inferences in those text messages, but it wasn't like in context is very obvious what it was. But when we were talking to law enforcement about this, the Phoenix PD officer who was reading through the text messages was like, well, that could be anything. And I'm like, could you please read the context around the entire thing? Don't just sit there and take it out of context as a single line soundbite. That's not how this works. You need to read the conversation leading up to and after that point. Which he said, okay, great, whatever. I mean, I agree with you, but I can't defend this in court. I'm like, no one's asking you to defend anything in court. I'm asking you to write a police report here and get detectives who are trained properly to identify this stuff so that they can write a probable cause statement based on what? Their knowledge, their training, and their experience. You, Mr. Black and White guy pushing a black and white up and down the street here, do not have the proper knowledge, training, and experience, and you know that you need to have the right person involved here. That's not you. Please file the report. Please get a detective out here who understands this stuff. Nope, not going to happen. So also in all of this, in her interview too, she mentioned that she would do odd jobs around, and he would pay her, some money for folding his laundry and doing this and doing that. And one day after she was done folding a whole bunch of laundry, he said, hey, let me make you a special drink. And she said, I said, okay, and was it alcohol? What was it? She said, well, I don't know what it was. Was it alcohol? No, I don't think it was alcohol. Well, what do you think it was? She's like, I don't know. It was just it was a drink. It tasted weird. What did it taste like? Well, it kind of tasted like cough syrup. I'm like, huh. I'm like, okay. Then what happened? She's like, well, I started feeling dizzy. And like, I couldn't control anything. And so I ran to the bathroom and I laid down on the floor. I'm like, okay, how long were you there? About 45 minutes. Okay. And then what happened? Well, I got up and I went to bed. I'm like, okay, you went to bed and you just went to sleep? She's like, yeah. I'm like, how long were you asleep for? Well, about 18 hours. I'm like, why do you say 18 hours? She's like, well, I know I finished doing the laundry. It was right around this time. And then I woke up the next day at like 1 in the afternoon. Okay, yeah, it's about 18 hours. And this is, by the way, an honor student. Like, this kid is very, like, getting very good grades. She's not dumb. And so I said, okay, when you woke up, how did you feel? She's like, well, I had a headache, my stomach hurt, and my lower back hurt. And I went, huh, your lower back hurt. I'm like, why do you think that was? She's like, I don't know. And I went, okay. And I moved on past that. I'll tell you right now, having talked to some doctors about this particular incident, we all believe that she was probably roofied at this point. She lost 18 hours of time during her sleep, and she may have very well been sexually assaulted during that period. We don't know. It would need more investigation, but nobody's doing more investigation. She also talked about a possible hidden camera in the bedroom. And I said, why do you think there's a hidden camera? She's like, well, there's this frog that is on the dresser and it's pointed at the bed, like at an angle to where it sees the bed and it sees the bathroom. I said, okay, did you do anything with it? Well, yeah, I took it and I put it in the closet. I'm like, okay, so that seems to have taken care of that. She's like, well, every time I'd leave my room after, you know, doing that, the frog would be put right back in that same place again. I'm like, okay, so you think that's weird? Yeah, and that's why you believe there's a hidden camera in it? Well, that and the fact that sometimes he would come out of the other room with his computer and the lube and blah 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 and whatever. So okay, so again, speaking from my experience, having dealt with these cases before in the voyeurism aspect of things, involving close contact with minors and this type of exploitation, yeah, the predator, the pedophile, puts some sort of hidden camera in the room and monitors it um, pretty closely because they're gaining their their rush from being able to see this minor. This is a path to escalation, right? And this is where that modeling thing starts to come in. So he had been doing this for since day one, it sounds like, of her being inside of that place there, inside of that room. And mind you, I recorded this entire interview with her. She knew she was being recorded when she said all of these things. Law enforcement listened to these interviews, right? And still felt that, I don't know that there's nothing here. So remember we talked about these guys. So let's break it all down one by one. So the initial report, we went to the school resource officer. Once we identified that there was enough here that that law enforcement needed to be involved, and somebody with the appropriate authority, which isn't me, private investigator, right? I'm not Zorro. I'm not, the vigilante out here. I have a point where I have to stop, and I'm not the appropriate person to take this beyond this point, right, and move it forward. So where do we go first? Well, I've dealt with Phoenix PD enough times. I've dealt with their I've dealt with their school resource officers with some of the cases, and one of my clients that is a private school here in the Phoenix metro area. And so I've dealt with the Phoenix PD resource officers before, and they tend to be some of the better trained police officers, especially when it comes to understanding crimes against children. Outside of the actual, family violence bureau, these resource officers are your best bet for, at least getting a somewhat of an entry point. So they list the officer over at the school there. Did the initial conversation with me, and I did have the victim's older sister, who was an adult with me, because I needed to have a family member, if possible, with me. And the eldest sister was like, "Yep, I knew something was going on. I didn't know what. I absolutely will go through and talk to people, whatever, as a part of this process. Thank you." So he gets the door open with Scottsdale PD after talking with some of the Phoenix detectives, gets a incident number for us, and under Phoenix PD and Scottsdale PD's advisement, they said, okay, just drive into our city limits, call us up, give us the report number, and we'll send somebody out to come talk to you. Fantastic. So Scottsdale is the principal jurisdiction because the potential crimes against the minors occurred in their city. So they would have to be the initiating agency. This is what all the conversation that went on between Phoenix PD's detectives, who got on the phone with this resource officer, and Scottsdale's watch sergeant, or whoever it was. Scottsdale PD didn't even actually come to meet and talk to me at all. They just did a phone call with me, and I said, listen, I have all this data, I have everything here for you to look at. Please don't take my word for it. Right? Nope. No, I don't see that there's enough here. None of this really matters. And I said, okay, well, I know for a fact you guys have detectives who specialize in dealing with this sort of thing. can I talk to one of them, because I feel like this is an issue of you're not understanding what I'm saying, because there's a level of sophistication beyond, you know, this just being a, like, I did not observe a rape. And then that was one of the questions that they basically asked me. Well, did you see this happen? Well, of course not. Of course I didn't see it happen. This would be a very different conversation if I saw it happen. So around every turn, they were a little combative with me. Scottsdale PD was. And the final result was, yeah, you've got an incident number. We're not filing a report. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. The victim had been living with her best friend, her BFF's family, for the last 6 to 7 months, on and off, but for the most part had been living there because she could get to school on time. She was there doing her homework. They all had a routine. She was an integrated part of that family's household and everything. After we had done our initial conversation with mom, and mom agreed to cooperate with us and was like, yep, thank you, this is so great. I'm finally going to get help. This is, you know, my husband's been abusive to me. This guy, you know, essentially raped me because he said if I didn't pay, you know, didn't have sex with them, that he was going to like have my kids taken away from me, blah, blah, blah. So she's cooperating with us. So she gives us her phone. We dump all the text messages off. We bring her phone back. Dad comes out of the temporary living situation that they're in, high as a kite, and starts getting aggressive with her. We tap dance a little bit just to kind of calm the situation down, because I didn't need to see this guy beating this woman, and I didn't need to walk away with her knowing that she's about to be beaten. He didn't see her, didn't see that we had handed the phone back to her, so he had no idea what had actually gone on there, but apparently he coerced her afterwards after we left, and mom flip-flopped on us and was now like, give me my daughter back. This guy, the predator, is dangerous, and he's gonna kill your family, and he'll kill my family. I just have to get her back with me and everything will be okay. Well, of course we dial 911 at that point, because we basically got someone who we know to be a drug user, who potentially may have, you know, pimped her daughter out to this guy and everything, now making a threat against life. So Phoenix PD shows up, and at this point we're also like, okay, we know how this is going to go. We have street officers showing up here. This is going to be an absolute mess. We've got to get on the phone with DCS. So I make the initial abuse hotline call, and DCS and Phoenix PD on the phone, and Phoenix PD showing up. Didn't think that there were any issues here, despite all the facts that I've already, you know, discussed with you. They were all given all this information, and even looked through the text messages directly themselves. And the one officer said, yeah, it's definitely creepy. And I said, okay, officer, that creepy feeling you're having, professionally, we call that grooming. Okay, there's a word for this, and I know that you don't understand that, and you've not been trained around that, but trust me, you need to involve somebody with some, again, training, knowledge, and experience in handling these types of issues, which is not you guys pushing these black and whites up and down the road here. Oh, I hear what you're saying, blah, blah, blah. More cops show up. Within probably about 20 minutes, we had somewhere around 7 to 8 cops on scene there for this whole thing. None of them actually contributing to anything, just a bunch of people showing up to see what was going on. There was a lot of lingering around kind of happening. They didn't see a problem with any of this. So we, because of some of the work we also do with juvenile cases, we do have some relationships with contracted guardian ad litems. If you're not familiar with what a guardian ad litem is, there's a person who has no affiliation to any of the sides involving an adult. They are specifically a legal protector of of a minor child, and they are specially trained to understand the law and to look out for the best interest of the child. So the first attorney that showed up is a county contracted guardian ad litem here in Maricopa County, and she works these kinds of cases all the time. The second attorney handles juvenile criminal cases. The two of them are partners, and they do work together like business partners in a firm, and they do work together to help be an advocate for juveniles and help kids navigate the system. Both of them do contract work. They do take on private cases, but the lion's share of the work that they do is all contract work across Maricopa, Yavapai, and Pima counties. So they're handling cases on behalf of the county, on behalf of the state, helping juveniles all the time. They are the experts in this. The guardian ad litem asked the Phoenix police sergeant, as a professional courtesy, to just request having a DCS field agent come out. Phoenix PD basically said, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And then I was standing there, I listened to the conversation. It was basically like, yeah, there's some lawyer here who wants a field person to come out. And yeah, it's related to that thing. There's a private investigator that just called it in. Yeah. Okay, I'll let them know. Hey, I talked to DCS and they're saying the same thing. They're not sending anybody out. It took her getting on the phone with DCS, identifying herself as a contracted guardian ad litem with the court under the specific judge that she works under for these cases, and basically like reading them the riot act and compelling them to get a field agent out to do the intake on this. During that time, while we're waiting on that field agent to arrive, the sergeant with Phoenix PD made an attempt to intimidate counsel and also interfere with her representation of the minor, of the victim. Interfering with counsel is a big constitutional no-no. Don't ever get between, whether you're a cop or not, don't ever get between somebody and their lawyer, because if you do, that lawyer has all kinds of constitutional and case law things to come at you as the individual all day. I've seen it happen on a couple cases, and I actually saw a police officer get put on the Brady list for misconduct for interfering with counsel. So this was a big issue, and they kept trying to explain to this Phoenix PD sergeant that she needed to, stop trying to intimidate the victim. And this was the crazy thing with this entire situation was Phoenix PD was just like, this is just a bratty child. This is just a brat. Why are we making a big deal? This kid's just being a brat. There was a lot of like dismissive / victim shaming kind of things, like, oh, well, she got in the car with him, so she did, if anything did happen to her, she did it to herself. Let that just settle in. These are sworn law enforcement officers saying this to us. So after an intense exchange, we finally get the situation kind of calmed down. Field agent arrives. There was a lot of screaming and crying on the inside. I stayed outside with the one officer, and very, very aware of the fact that I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I'm also not the smallest guy in the world, and they all had their eyes on me like I was the threat. So I remained in one place, spoke to the one officer, and didn't move from that one spot outside, next to the car that was parked out there. So finally, everybody calmed down. The field guy shows up from DCS, and he starts investigating. He agrees with our assessment after reviewing the text messages and everything. I let him listen to recording of the interview. We went through some of my notes on the interview and everything, and he took his own notes, and he said, great, talk to her. But at this point, we had the problem that this minor had been intimidated by these parties who were supposed to be there for her, to help her for her own protection. So we went from a position of a conversation where this girl felt comfortable. She was talking to me. We had this conversation. She was telling me about some of the stuff that this guy did, some of the things where her mom had put her in a bad situation, some of the physical abuse involving her dad and everything. So we have all this recorded, everything's there. But now we've had this aggressive intervention by these police officers who had initially responded because, again, this child was just being a brat. So we end up in a scenario where DCS shows up, and now he's going to conduct his interview, his investigation. The victim at this point is withdrawn into herself. She's not saying yes, she's not saying no. He's asking her questions, and if you've ever seen a child who's in trouble with their parents, and they drop their head down, they're looking down at the floor, their shoulders kind of come together and slump down, and they're kind of just like almost doubling over on themselves. That's 100% what was going on with this child. I could see her in the room when they were talking to her, and that was 100% what happened. She was talking to the guardian ad litem prior to that interaction, and now she's not talking to the guardian ad litem. So this entire thing, because of some headstrong street cops, now all of a sudden we have a victim, a sensitive victim, and a minor, a child, just being not able to even stand up for herself because of what she just went through. He also spoke to the mom. He went over and spoke to the victim's mom, and she restated the predator was a threat to them. She also admitted to DCS that she was working as a prostitute, but denied any involving her daughter in any of those activities in any way. But as we know from the information off of her phone, that's probably not 100% true. So that night, DCS, we got some temporary relief. The girl was already in bed. It was late by that time. So mom agreed in her best interest with the DCS and with Phoenix PD to let the child stay that one last night. Where she had basically been living for the last 7 months, and this other family was like feeding and clothing and caring for her the entire time. But now all of a sudden there's an emergency and we have to take her away from here to transient housing. But this whole time, again, still Phoenix PD and DCS are saying our hands are tied, we can't do anything, blah, blah, blah. The gal, the guardian ad litem, said, okay, well, this is enough for us to buy some time. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to file an emergency injunction with the court. And on behalf of the victim to get a temporary order for her to stay where she is, in a safe home. She's going to school. She's not missing school. She's healthy. She's being fed. We're good to go. This is probably the best place for her until we can sort this out as adults later on. We don't need to have any of these disruptive type scenarios occur again. So we thought that was great. Next day, the gal goes into court, and she's informed that the emergency custody petitions are no longer being heard. The week prior, the presiding judge basically said, we're not doing this anymore. Why? I don't know. I didn't get into any of that. Next morning, though, also, so victim doesn't know that that's become an issue, but she wakes up the next morning with extreme stomach pain, and she doesn't go to school. You don't need to be a child psychologist to know that when children go through stressful situations, they often get stomach pain. It's a very common thing. We all, as adults, it's something that happens to us too. When we're stressed, we start to have some gut pain. So she wakes up with this pain in her stomach. She doesn't go to school. However, our concern, myself, the lawyers now, is that BFF mom could be, if she doesn't call the victim's mom, based on the last order from DCS and Phoenix PD, that this, this could be viewed as kidnapping. So we had to, we told PFF mom to tell victim's mom, let her know she didn't go to school. Let her know now. Eventually, victim's mom wakes up from whatever drug-induced stupor she was in, and comes and picks the kid up from the house. So, Homeland Security. So after all of that goes down, in the interim right now, so the guardian ad litem has now filed a dependency case in the court. That could take several weeks, right? Week to 2 weeks to get in front of a judge based on the calendar and everything. So is what it is. The girl's back with mom and dad right now, and potentially with the predator again. We don't know. Because especially at this point, me as the private investigator, law enforcement has been involved, even though they're not taking over it, but I have to be careful not to put myself in a position where I am interfering with an investigation, hindering prosecution, any of that sort of stuff. So I had to kind of take a step back, but here I am holding this victim's iPhone that she handed to me, willingly gave to me, and said so, on the recording during the interview, that I could take it and I could look through it and everything. So I said, okay, Phoenix PD doesn't want this. It's got evidence on it involving a crime against a child. I'm sure as hell not giving it back to her mom and dad. This has to go into somebody else's custody, because before too long, someone's gonna wise up on that other side, and they're gonna get the cops to force me to hand it over. And sure enough, that's eventually what they tried to do. But luckily, I was able to get in contact with Homeland Security Investigations in Phoenix. Brought them in my case file and everything. They looked through it, and and they basically were like, "Yep, this is definitely grooming. We'll take this, and we'll look into it." So they took possession of the iPhone, of the evidence, and they went ahead and did their thing. About 30 days later, and after what I'm going to get into the next part about this from the timeline perspective, because something else happened in this 30 days. But 30 days later, the case agent stated that, we ran it internally and decided it wasn't something we were going to pursue. And I asked him, you got any other information for me on that, or is that where you're going to leave it? He's like, that's where I'm going to leave it. I said, all right, fair enough. So speculation, this is, the abuse didn't happen across state lines. So the abuse element of things doesn't rise to the level of the interstate commerce aspect of it. They didn't travel across state lines, so it's not an interstate issue. There are some potential contraband issues there, and there's also the narcotics issue. But grand scheme of things, this case probably didn't even break into their top 200, because there's probably other cases where they've got 10, 15, 20 different victims in there. And this is one kid, again, she's 15, about to turn 16, and she's willingly going with this guy now, because that's what it looks like. She's complying. So you're all probably this is what you all look like right now, right? Because this is how I felt too after I hung up the phone with that agent. So the final outcome, after a couple visits, it took 2 different visits to the court. First 2 weeks, the mom didn't show up to the court. Guardian ad litem did. And then the judge said, no, I want to hear from mom. And oh, by the way, bring the child. So another 2 weeks later is about 30 days out from that initial intense interaction there. Minor completely flip-flopped. No surprise. None of us were surprised that this was the outcome, by the way. And if any of you, after thinking that the child was going to stick to where we initially started this, after being put back into the home with her abusers, if you didn't think that she was going to flip-flop, then I'm shocked, but I think probably most of you knew that this was very likely coming, and it did. She started blaming her best friend and other people for, quote, ratting her out. She denied everything in front of the judge and told the court that she wanted to stay with her parents. Because she was 15 and about to turn 16, her testimony was taken as fact. Had she been younger, the court would have not given her testimony so much weight, but because of her age, she was given weight. She remains in the custody of mom and dad, and we were all shaking our damn heads afterwards. So we went through all this trouble. All these professionals put forth a lot of effort. There were times where there was great risk at our, to us professionally. And, we just for it all to be just kind of go out the door. This problem is a very small case that highlights, I think, a much bigger problem. Across the entire country, I know that the process for the intake for these types of cases 100% rests in the patrol officer's hands. So our problem is we've got to either better train our patrol officers to understand the complexities of these issues. Okay, we're living in a different world. It's time for the people protecting us to update their knowledge base and meet with it, or the process needs to be changed and there needs to be specially trained or triage detectives or somebody along those lines who are properly trained to understand and identify and deal with all this.